Okay, go ahead. Pull open your cutlery drawer right now. Or, just picture in your mind. You've probably got spoons, knives, and yeah, it's a totally standard dinner fork. It's just there, completely normal, utilitarian, quiet, maybe even a little bit boring. But what if I told you that for almost 1,000 years across Europe, that simple fork was seen as, well, outrageous. Seriously, it was foreign. People thought it was dangerous. And get this, high-ranking religious figures actually condemned it, called it decadent, prideful, even sinful. So today we're doing a deep dive into the really curious, kind of contentious history of the dinner fork. Our mission to take this thing we barely notice and figure out the huge cultural religious forces that fought against it for centuries. We're basically tracing its journey from like an instrument of vanity to the totally standard tool it is now.
And it's just a fascinating look at cultural inertia, isn't it? The source material really highlights how change, even when it seems obviously better, more convenient, more hygienic, often gets this massive pushback. Just because it messes with long-held traditions. We're following its path from Byzantine courts through medieval feasts, right up to the social, scorn it faced in 17th century London.
Okay, let's dig in then. We probably need to start with the baseline, right? To really get why the fork was such a shock, we have to picture what dining looked like before it showed up in those grand medieval halls. So paint us a picture. It's dark, noisy, right? High vaulted ceilings, big feasts laid out, roasted swans, whole pigs. How did people actually, eat all that stuff?
Well, they interacted with it very directly. Manners, as we think of them today, totally different concept. Guests usually brought their own personal sharp daggers. They'd use those to carve off bits of meat from like a shared roast. Spoons were definitely there, but mostly for liquid stews, broths, that kind of thing. And for pretty much everything else. Vegetables, small pieces of meat, tearing bread to sort of scoop things up. It was mostly hands. Specifically, the first 3 fingers of the right hand, that was the custom.
Wow. So we're talking a lot of grease, dipping things directly into communal bowls, dripping. It sounds incredibly messy to us now. But the key thing you're saying is that wasn't bad manners back then. That was just normal, social.
Exactly. It wasn't seen as rude at all. It was communal. It was tactile. That was the accepted way. And understanding that context is absolutely crucial because it really sets the stage for the huge culture shock when the fork, this tool designed specifically to avoid touching food lands in Western Europe.
And it wasn't like prong tools were totally new, were they? It wasn't some brand new invention?
No, not at all. Prong tools were ancient, really. The ancient Egyptians used big ones for cooking, and smaller, really fancy gold forks. They'd been around in the Byzantine Empire for ages, since maybe the 7th century. For the Byzantines, using them was all about sophistication, elegance, showing you were part of the refined elite.
Okay, so if it had status in the East, why the scandal when it headed west? What happened?
That brings us to the sort of pivotal story, the anecdote that really, you could argue, poisoned the well for the fork in the West for centuries. This is around the year 1000 AD, and it centers on a Byzantine princess, Theodora Anna Dukaina.
Right, so she's bringing this like high culture, these status symbols from Constantinople to Venice, which was much more traditional in its ways.
Precisely. Theodora marries into the Venetian nobility. Her dowry is huge gold, jewels, but also these incredibly luxurious household things, including, yes, these delicate, sometimes jewel-encrusted sets of golden forks. So imagine these big Venetian feasts. The locals are all still carving with daggers, using their hands, and Theodora, she's using her little 2-pronged golden tools to lift morsels, keeping her fingers totally clean, no grease. For her, this was the peak of civilized dining.
I can just picture it. She's sitting there all composed, delicately eating food or something. Well, everyone else probably looks like they're, wrestling their food. How did the Venetians take this display of refinement?
They didn't see refinement, not one bit. They saw shocking arrogance, total vanity. The local nobles, and this is key, the clergy too, were genuinely appalled. Their argument was basically theological. God gave humans fingers natural forks, right? Functional tools. Why would you reject God's gift like that?
So using the fork was seen as rejecting God's design. Wow. But the fallout wasn't just social awkwardness, was it? It got much worse.
Oh, absolutely. And this is where the story turns the fork from just a weird foreign object into something religiously toxic. Tragically, Theodora got sick and died quite young, not long after she arrived in Venice. And certain priests, certain religious figures, they absolutely seized on this.
They used her death as a kind of cautionary tale.
Exactly. They preached that her death wasn't just illness, it was divine punishment, God striking her down for her sinful vanity. for daring to use those artificial, prideful golden forks instead of her God-given hands. So the fork gets branded. It's dangerous. It's spiritually corrupt, morally tainted. It becomes this potent warning symbol across Europe.
That's incredible, a piece of cutlery causing a theological crisis. Okay, stepping back from that dramatic story. What were the sort of underlying fears? Why was medieval Europe so ready to believe this? Why resist such a simple tool for so long?
Well, you can really break down the suspicion into three main layers, all powerful in the medieval mind that kind of work together to keep the fork off the table.
Okay, let's start with the big one, the religious symbolism that Theodore ran into.
Right, that's the deepest layer. In the medieval Christian view, the human body, especially the hands, were seen as holy creations, designed by God for specific tasks, including eating. So eating with your fingers was an act of humility, acknowledging that divine design, bringing in a fancy manufactured metal tool. This smacked of pride. It looked like human cleverness trying to one-up God.
And pride was the root of all sin, in their thinking.
Okay.
But the second layer sounds much more visual, almost primal.
It really was. The second layer was the devilish imagery. Those early forks, especially the two-pronged ones from Byzantium and Italy, they looked an awful lot like the devil's pitchfork or trident. Now, in an age deeply concerned with salvation, damnation, the constant presence of demons, associating an everyday object, something you put near your mouth, with the symbol of Satan himself, that was a huge, huge barrier. It wasn't just a tool. It was like a tiny little piece of hell at the dinner table.
It's amazing. Just the look of it. Two prongs holds back adoption for centuries because of that fear. You pick up a fork, you see Satan's weapon. Yeah, that would make dinner awkward. So what was the third layer? Something about the atmosphere at these feasts.
Yes, the third factor was violence and potential disruption at the table.
Yeah.
Like we said, everyone already had knives, daggers, and banquets could be pretty rowdy affairs. Lots of drinking, political tensions simmering. So adding another sharp, pointy metal object to that mix, one that wasn't even essential for carving. It just looked like adding unnecessary risk, escalating the potential for trouble. Why bring in another potential weapon when everyone was used to hands and the knives they already had? So for medieval diners, the fork looked disruptive, spiritually, socially, and physically.
Wow. So pick up a fork and you're basically saying, I'm prideful, I hang out with the devil, and maybe I'm looking for a fight. Yeah, no wonder it took so long to catch on. Okay, but even fear can't stop practical needs forever, right? Where did the resistance finally start to crack? And what gave people a good reason to risk using that devilish tool?
Well, change, maybe inevitably, started in Italy around the 14th, 15th centuries. And the big driver, believe it or not, was pasta. Yeah, pasta. Especially things like long strands of spaghetti. They were just really, really awkward to eat elegantly with just your fingers, or maybe a knife. The forchetto was perfectly designed for twisting those slippery noodles, guiding them neatly. So for the Italian upper classes, who were already into luxury and new things, the sheer practicality started to outweigh the old stigma.
But the rest of Europe looked at this and thought it was just weird Italians doing weird Italian things. Mockery ensued.
Oh, absolutely. Brutal mockery. And the best example is probably the English traveler Thomas Coriat, early 1600s. He travels in Italy, sees the fork, thinks it's brilliant, super convenient, and proudly brings the habit back home to England.
He thought he was being sophisticated, introducing a civilizing influence. How did his fellow Englishmen react?
They just relentlessly made fun of him, publicly ridiculed him. They thought it was incredibly effeminate, affected, a dandyish habit. And the nickname they gave him tells you everything. They called him Furcifer, which is just perfect in a nasty way. It's Latin for fork bearer, literally. But the common meaning back then? It meant a scoundrel, a rogue, someone who deserved to wear a yoke like a criminal.
A scoundrel. Just for using a fork.
Just for trying to keep his fingers clean eating roast beef. That's how deep the resistance went.
That really says it all. And even in France, right, the supposed center of fashion, Catherine de' Medici brought forks from Florence in the 16th century, but it still didn't really stick then.
No, not really. It remained this strange foreign oddity for a long time. A sign you were putting on airs, or maybe just a bit peculiar.
Okay, so we've got religious fear, devilish resemblance, cultural mockery, all keeping the fork pretty marginal for, what, 600 or 700 years? If fashion and convenience couldn't quite bring through that resistance, what finally did it? What made the fork basically mandatory?
It seems to be a combination, really. Two big things converging in the 17th century. Science, or at least early ideas about hygiene, and a royal command. The whole game changed when people started seriously connecting cleanliness with health.
Right. This is where the moral argument completely flips, isn't it? Suddenly those God-given fingers don't seem quite so pure.
Precisely. By the 17th century, you start getting these early ideas about public health, about hygiene gaining some traction. People began to think maybe handling food directly after touching who knows what isn't such a great idea. Maybe dirty hand spread. Well, filth. And maybe disease. So the fork's image undergoes this radical transformation. From a symbol of sinful pride, separating you from God's natural way, it gets recast as a tool of protection. Separating your potentially dirty, germy hand from the food going to your body, it starts to look modern, healthy, refined.
So the thing condemned for moral failure becomes an icon of sanitary progress. That's a massive mental shift. But you mentioned a governmental push, too, a royal command.
Yes, that seems to be the final piece, especially in France. King Louis XIV, who was all about imposing order and, frankly, reducing the casual violence at court. He issued a decree banning sharp-pointed knives at the dinner table. Those personal knives people use both for cutting food and, well, sometimes for stabbing each other.
Okay, so if you suddenly can't use your sharp knife for eating and using your hands is starting to look kind of dirty, what's left?
Exactly. The ban on sharp table knives created this sort of utensil vacuum. The fork, which by then was being redesigned with more tines offer fore and blunter ends, making it look less like a weapon, was the logical tool left standing. Louis didn't exactly mandate the fork, but he effectively removed its main competition for safety reasons.
And once the French court adopted it with that royal nudge, everyone else just fell into line pretty quickly.
The floodgates just opened. French court set the fashion for Europe. By the early 18th century, the fork was basically standard everywhere. Europe, the Americas. It finally completed that long, bizarre journey, from dangerous, blasphemous foreign object to the totally normal, unquestioned tool of civilized dining.
What a ride. So the story isn't really about a slow, gradual refinement. It's more like centuries of deep resistance, then a pretty sudden flip driven by hygiene concerns and royal safety measures.
Yeah, it really shows how tightly tradition holds on, often wrapped up in these moral or religious justifications. But sometimes, when there's a strong enough practical push, hygiene, safety, maybe just eating pasta less messily, even deeply ingrained fears like seeing the devil in your cutlery can just evaporate.
So next time you're looking at that totally standard, maybe boring stainless steel fork, just remember, that thing was once scandalous enough to get a princess labeled a sinner punished by God. It's quite a reminder, isn't it, that sometimes the most ordinary things on our tables have these absolutely extraordinary high-stakes histories behind them, forged in real cultural battles. Makes you wonder what other simple, humble tools you use every day, things that seem totally neutral now. What secret history might they be hiding? Were they once feared as disruptive, dangerous, or maybe even sinful too? Something to think about next time you set the table.